What if the greatest revolution in human history didn't begin with kings' empires or pyramids, but with a handful of families choosing to stay in one place? Long before cities, writing, or civilization itself, the world's first villages quietly changed the future of humanity forever. Hidden beneath layers of earth, these forgotten settlements reveal a story far stranger than most people imagine. Tonight we'll uncover how the first permanent communities were born and why their secrets are still rewriting history. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. It truly helps us create more fascinating journeys into humanity's forgotten past. Now let's travel back to where civilization first began. The silence arrives first. Before walls rise, before streets appear, before anyone imagines kingdoms or cities, there is only a broad landscape stretching beneath a warming sky. The great ice sheets that dominate much of the northern hemisphere for thousands of years are retreating. Rivers carve fresh channels across newly exposed ground. Lakes appear where frozen valleys once stand empty. Forests spread into territories that have not known trees for countless generations. Across these changing lands, small bands of people move with remarkable skill, following the rhythms of animals, wild grains, fish, and the seasons. They carry no maps yet. They know every ridge, every spring, every migration route with astonishing precision. Nothing about their lives suggests permanence. Everything depends on movement. Yet somewhere within this immense transformation, humanity quietly begins one of the greatest experiments in its entire history. No single morning marks the beginning. No leader announces the decision. No invention suddenly changes everything. Instead, something almost invisible starts to happen. Certain camps become familiar. Families return to the same valley not only once but again and again. Children grow up recognizing particular cliffs, certain rivers, specific groves of nut trees. The landscape slowly changes from somewhere people travel through into somewhere they belong. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. For generations, historians imagined civilization beginning with grand monuments, kings, temples, or written records. Archaeology tells a far quieter story. The first villages emerged long before writing, long before bronze weapons, long before organized states. They begin with ordinary people making countless practical decisions that over centuries slowly alter the course of human history. No one living through these moments can possibly understand that they are laying foundations upon which billions of future lives will eventually depend. The world itself encourages change. Around 11,700 years ago, the last major ice age gives way to the warmer period, known today as the Holocene. Temperatures stabilize compared with the dramatic fluctuations of the previous millennia. Forests advance across Europe. Grasslands shift across Western Asia. Wetlands expand in some regions while others gradually dry. Animal populations respond, and so do the humans who depend upon them. This new climate does not create villages by itself, but it creates possibilities that rarely exist before. Longer growing seasons allow wild cereals to flourish across parts of the Fertile Crescent. Fish become abundant in rivers and lakes that remain productive throughout the year. Oak forests provide reliable harvests of acorns. Pistachio trees, almonds, berries, legumes, and countless edible plants appear in predictable cycles. Instead of constantly chasing scattered resources across vast distances, people discover places where food returns season after season. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that some communities begin revisiting these especially rich environments with increasing regularity. At first, their stays remain temporary. Shelters are built, abandoned, and rebuilt. Hearths leave thin layers of charcoal beneath the soil. Stone tools accumulate in surprising numbers. Bones reveal repeated hunting of familiar species. Tiny fragments of burned seeds hint that people are processing plants more systematically than ever before. None of these discoveries seems extraordinary on its own. Together, however, they tell a subtle story. The rhythm of life is beginning to slow. For hundreds of thousands of years, movement has been humanity's greatest strength. Mobility allows survival through drought, harsh winters, failed hunts, and changing climates. Entire communities can relocate when resources disappear. Flexibility becomes an essential adaptation. Remaining in one place for too long often carries significant risks. Even so, staying offers advantages that constant movement never can. A familiar campsite requires less effort to establish. Paths become well known. Nearby water sources are understood in every season. Local plants are recognized not simply as food, but as reliable parts of an annual cycle. Knowledge accumulates within a specific landscape instead of constantly expanding across new territory. Children learn where dangerous floods occur, where edible roots survive dry summers, and where migrating animals predictably cross rivers. The land itself becomes a form of memory. Archaeologists occasionally uncover places where generation after generation rebuilds directly upon earlier occupations. Each visit leaves another thin layer of soil ash, broken tools, discarded food, and collapsed structures. Over centuries, these layers slowly rise into artificial mounds known across Southwest Asia as tells. What begins as an ordinary campsite gradually becomes elevated above the surrounding plain through nothing more dramatic than repeated human presence. These rising mounds preserve one of the clearest records of humanity's changing relationship with place. The people living there are not yet farmers in the familiar sense. Many still hunt gazelle deer, wild cattle birds, and fish. They gather nuts, fruits, seeds, and grasses from the surrounding landscape. Scholars still debate exactly how quickly food production develops, because the evidence remains incomplete and varies greatly between different regions. No single explanation fully accounts for the transition. Farming does not replace hunting overnight. For many centuries, both ways of life exist together. The image of agriculture suddenly transforming humanity turns out to be far too simple. Instead, communities experiment continuously. Wild cereals are harvested more efficiently. Grinding stones become increasingly common, suggesting that seeds and grains occupy a larger place in daily diets. Storage pits appear, allowing surplus food to survive beyond a single season. Such innovations reduce uncertainty, although they also encourage people to remain close to places where these investments make sense. Storage changes more than food, it changes time itself. A hunter carrying everything needed for survival thinks largely in terms of immediate movement. A community protecting stored grain begins thinking months ahead. The coming winter becomes something that can be prepared for, rather than merely endured. Labor today may produce security long into the future. This shift is subtle yet profound. Even the architecture reflects new expectations. Temporary shelters require speed. More substantial buildings require confidence that they will still matter next year. Digging foundations, collecting timber, shaping mud, repairing walls after heavy rains, all demand effort that only becomes worthwhile if people intend to return repeatedly. The earliest permanent structures remain modest by later standards, but they reveal remarkable optimism. They represent faith that a place will continue providing life. Every repaired wall quietly declares that tomorrow is expected to resemble today. Such confidence is never guaranteed. The Holocene climate, although generally warmer, still produces difficult years. Floods alter river channels. Drought reduces harvests of wild plants. Animal migrations shift unexpectedly. Entire communities may still abandon settlements when conditions deteriorate. Archaeology preserves both persistence and movement, reminding us that permanence always exists on a spectrum rather than as a simple choice. Meanwhile, something equally important unfolds within human relationships. Larger groups spending more time together must cooperate differently than highly mobile bands. Shared spaces require new habits. Food storage demands trust. Construction requires coordinated labor. Children encounter more people outside their immediate families. Older individuals preserve memories extending across decades within a single location. Knowledge itself begins settling into the landscape. A spring known by grandparents becomes known by grandchildren. A burial place gains emotional meaning through repeated visits. Certain hills become landmarks woven into family histories. The physical environment gradually transforms into a cultural one. No written records describe these moments. No voices survive to explain what people think while rebuilding another house upon the same ground or planting themselves once again beside the same stream. Yet the accumulated evidence suggests that an extraordinary threshold is being crossed almost unnoticed. Humanity is beginning to build not simply shelters but places where memory can live. The first villages have not fully appeared. Their streets do not yet exist. Their walls remain low, scattered and uncertain. But beneath layers of earth, charcoal seeds and stone tools, archaeology preserves the earliest signs that people are no longer merely passing through the world. They are beginning slowly and almost accidentally to stay. The decision to remain in one place never arrives as a dramatic turning point. It emerges through repetition. One spring becomes 2, then 5, then 20. A campsite visited every year gradually stops feeling temporary. The familiar bend in a river, the limestone ridge that shelters against winter, wins the marsh rich with reeds and fish, all become anchors in a world that had long been defined by movement. No one announces that a village has been founded. Instead, countless ordinary choices slowly reshape human existence until the old way of life begins to feel less inevitable than it once did. Across the Levant, Upper Mesopotamia and neighboring regions, archaeological sites reveal communities returning to the same locations with remarkable consistency. The people living there are still expert hunters and gatherers. Gazelle remain an important source of meat. Wild barley and wheat continue to be collected rather than fully cultivated. Pistachios, almonds, figs, lentils, and edible grasses provide dependable seasonal nutrition. Rivers supply fish, turtles, freshwater mussels, and waterfowl. Far from abandoning nature, these communities become increasingly skilled at understanding every detail of the environments that sustain them. The difference lies not in what they eat, but in how closely they come to know a single landscape. Over years of repeated occupation paths emerge between water sources and sleeping places. Certain stands of wild grain are harvested carefully enough that they continue producing season after season. Trees providing the best shade become familiar gathering places. Children grow into adults without needing to memorize entirely new territories every few months. The landscape itself becomes layered with experience, every ridge and stream carrying memories accumulated across generations. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that this growing familiarity encourages investment. Circular huts become more carefully constructed than before. Floors are leveled with packed earth. Stone foundations begin supporting walls made from mud reeds and timber. Roofs require periodic maintenance, implying that their builders expect a return. Storage pits become larger and more sophisticated, lined with clay or stone to protect precious food from moisture and rodents. These structures remain humble, yet they represent an extraordinary shift in thinking. A shelter built for several nights demands little planning. A structure intended to last through changing seasons requires confidence in the future. Confidence, however, never removes uncertainty. The evidence remains incomplete. and scholars still debate exactly why some communities settle more permanently, while others continue highly mobile lives. Climate certainly plays a role, but no single explanation fully accounts for the transition. Rich environments appear essential. Places blessed with dependable freshwater-abundant game, edible plants, and favourable weather naturally attract repeated occupation. Yet similar landscapes elsewhere continue supporting highly mobile groups for thousands more years. Human choices, traditions, social relationships, and local circumstances all seem to influence the outcome. One important clue comes from the remarkable variety of food found at these early settlements. Excavations frequently uncover thousands of animal bones representing multiple species, rather than dependence on only one resource. Fish bones mix with gazelle remains. Bird bones appear beside tortoise shells. Charred seeds from numerous wild plants lie scattered among grinding stones and hearths. Such diversity suggests resilience. Instead of relying upon a single harvest or migration, these communities spread risk across many different foods. Ironically, permanence depends upon flexibility. As people become more familiar with one landscape, they also become better at exploiting its changing opportunities throughout the year. Spring offers fresh greens and young animals. Summer provides berries and fish. Autumn brings nuts and grains. Winter demands careful use of stored resources. Living in one place no longer means waiting passively for food. It means mastering the full seasonal rhythm of an entire ecosystem. Storage quietly becomes one of humanity's greatest innovations. At first glance, a storage pit appears insignificant beside the pyramids or Roman roads that will come thousands of years later. Yet few developments alter history more profoundly. Food that survives beyond its harvest season changes daily life in countless subtle ways. Hunger becomes slightly less dependent upon immediate success. Parents can feed children during lean months. Older people remain valuable members of the community even when hunting grows difficult. Planning gradually stretches further into the future. This new relationship with time changes behavior. Communities begin protecting places where valuable food is stored. Returning each year becomes increasingly sensible because abandoning carefully prepared storage facilities means losing months of labor. Familiarity deepens. Houses improve. The settlement slowly acquires permanence without anyone necessarily intending to create a permanent village from the beginning. Meanwhile, another transformation unfolds beneath the surface of everyday life. As settlements remain occupied for longer periods, rubbish accumulates. Broken tools, animal bones, ashes, damaged baskets, worn grinding stones, and discarded building materials gradually form thick deposits around living spaces. To modern observers, these layers may appear untidy, but to archaeologists they become priceless records of changing human behavior. Every fragment captures a moment in ordinary life. Every discarded object contributes another page to a history written not with ink but with soil. Generations unknowingly build archives beneath their own feet. Children born into these settlements experience the world differently from their grandparents. They still learn hunting skills and seasonal gathering routes, but they also inherit houses repaired many times before their birth. They sleep above earlier floors occupied by relatives whose names are now forgotten. Certain locations become associated with family identity rather than temporary convenience. Belonging acquires a geographical dimension. The emotional consequences are impossible to measure directly, yet archaeology offers intriguing hints. Burials begin appearing closer to places where people live. Rather than leaving the dead far behind during constant movement, communities increasingly keep ancestors near the spaces of everyday life. The exact meanings remain uncertain, but the pattern suggests that settlement and memory are becoming deeply intertwined. Even conflict may change. Highly mobile hunter-gatherer groups can often avoid disputes simply by moving elsewhere. Permanent communities possess fewer such options. Shared resources, neighbouring households, and stored food create new reasons for cooperation, but also new opportunities for disagreement. The archaeological evidence for violence during this period varies considerably between regions, and scholars continue debating its significance. Nevertheless, permanence inevitably requires new methods of resolving tensions among people who cannot simply walk away. The village begins teaching lessons that wandering rarely demands. Responsibility expands beyond immediate survival. Houses require maintenance. Storage pits need protection. Shared pathways must remain usable. Water sources become communal concerns. Children are watched not only by parents but by neighbours. Daily routines increasingly depend upon cooperation among dozens of individuals living side by side. This social transformation may prove just as important as any technological innovation. Archaeological discoveries repeatedly demonstrate that humanity's earliest villages are not collections of isolated families existing independently. Construction projects often require coordinated labour. Large grinding stones may be shared. Open spaces appear to serve communal activities. Food preparation sometimes occurs at scales suggesting cooperation beyond individual households. Community itself becomes infrastructure. None of this happens quickly. Centuries pass while these gradual changes accumulate almost invisibly. A traveller returning after several generations might notice more houses, better built walls, larger storage areas and more established pathways, yet still recognise familiar hunting grounds surrounding the settlement. The old world has not vanished. It is quietly transforming from within. What survives in the record suggests that this long transition succeeds precisely because it remains gradual. There is no abrupt break between hunter and farmer, between movement and permanence, between camp and village. Instead, humanity advances through countless practical decisions made by ordinary people responding to local opportunities. Without realizing it, they are creating a new kind of landscape, one shaped not only by rivers, forests, and changing climates, but by memory, cooperation, and the growing belief that some places are worth building again and again, until they cease to be camps at all, and become something entirely new. The first true villages do not announce themselves from a distance with towering walls or monumental temples. Seen from a nearby hillside, they appear almost inseparable from the landscape around them. Low, rounded houses blend into the earth from which they are built. Roofs of timber, reeds, brush, and packed clay take on the colours of the surrounding soil. Smoke rises gently from small hearths before dissolving into the morning air. From afar, these settlements seem temporary. Up close, they reveal an entirely different story. Every wall represents time. Unlike a tent that can be folded and carried within hours, a mud-plastered house demands patience. Clay must be gathered from river banks or exposed ground. Water must be carried. Straw chaff or other plant fibres are mixed into the mud to strengthen it as it dries. Timber must be cut, shaped, and transported. Stone, where available, is collected to create stable foundations that help protect walls from seasonal moisture. Every stage requires labour spread over days or weeks, often involving multiple members of a community working together. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that these earliest builders possess remarkable practical knowledge rather than sophisticated engineering theory. They understand how walls behave after heavy rain. They know which soils crack under intense sunlight and which remain stable. They learn that slightly curved walls resist collapse better than perfectly straight ones. They discover how thick a roof must be to survive winter storms without becoming dangerously heavy. Architecture emerges not through written instruction, but through accumulated experience. Each new generation inherits techniques refined by countless repairs. A poorly built wall teaches lessons that become invisible in later, stronger constructions. Successful designs spread from household to household. Over many centuries, entire communities gradually develop recognizable architectural traditions, even though no formal blueprint has ever existed. Inside these houses, life grows more structured than it has been in highly mobile camps. The floors are often carefully leveled and covered with layers of packed earth or lime plaster. Hearths occupy familiar positions, becoming the warm center around which daily routines unfold. Grinding stones remain in fixed locations instead of being transported from place to place. Storage bins stand against walls, protecting precious food supplies from dampness and pests. Simple platforms may serve as sleeping areas during the night and workspaces during the day. Nothing inside appears luxurious. Yet compared with the uncertainty of constant movement, these homes offer something revolutionary: continuity. A child no longer wakes every few weeks in an unfamiliar landscape. Instead, seasons pass while the same doorway frames changing weather. Summer sunlight falls across the same floor where winter fires once burned. Memories begin attaching themselves not only to people but to rooms, corners, walls, and hearths. The house becomes more than shelter. It becomes an extension of identity. Archaeologists frequently uncover evidence that these buildings are repaired many times rather than abandoned after damage. Cracked walls are patched with fresh mud. Roofs are rebuilt. Floors receive new plaster layers, one spread carefully atop another. Some houses remain occupied for decades, occasionally even longer. When a building finally becomes unusable, its remains are often leveled, and a new structure rises almost directly above it. Generation literally builds upon generation. These repeated reconstructions gradually raise the ground beneath entire settlements. What begins as a flat piece of land slowly develops into an elevated mound, composed almost entirely of accumulated human activity. Thousands of years later, archaeologists slicing through these mounds discover an extraordinary vertical history. Every layer preserves another chapter of daily life. One floor contains the remains of a hearth. Above it lies another, then another. Each belongs to people separated by years or decades but connected through the same place. Building techniques also begin reflecting a growing understanding of community rather than merely individual households. Walls often stand close together, reducing the amount of exposed surface vulnerable to weather. Shared open spaces appear between clusters of homes. Narrow pathways gradually emerge from repeated use. Movement through the settlement becomes increasingly organized, even if no formal planning authority exists. No single explanation fully accounts for how these layouts develop. Some villages appear to grow organically as families build wherever space allows. Others display surprising degrees of order, suggesting long-term traditions guiding where houses should stand. The evidence remains incomplete because countless settlements disappear beneath erosion, later construction, or rising seas. Those that survive nevertheless reveal an impressive range of solutions to the challenge of permanent living. Construction also transforms the relationship between labor and time. Nomadic communities generally devote much of their effort to acquiring food and moving between seasonal resources. Permanent settlements introduce an entirely new category of work. Walls require maintenance. Roofs demand inspection after storms. Drainage must be improved when heavy rains threaten foundations. Building materials need continual replacement. Owning a house means accepting endless maintenance. Yet this investment produces equally significant rewards. Storage becomes safer. Infants and elderly people enjoy greater protection from harsh weather. Valuable tools remain secure instead of constantly being transported. Food processing grows more efficient because heavy grinding stones no longer need to be moved. Craft activities can continue inside sheltered spaces even during unfavorable weather. The village slowly becomes a machine for reducing uncertainty. As architecture improves, another subtle change appears in the archaeological record. Objects become heavier. Large grinding stones weighing many kilograms become increasingly common. Massive stone mortars remain permanently positioned inside homes. Clay-lined storage bins are built directly into floors. Such items would make little sense for highly mobile groups, but they become entirely practical for communities expecting to remain where they are. Permanence encourages specialization. Individuals can now devote time to producing better tools because those tools do not need to be carried across great distances. Builders experiment with stronger walls. Skilled craftspeople shape finer stone blades. Basket makers create larger storage containers. Every improvement saves labor somewhere else in daily life. These innovations rarely emerge from isolated genius. Instead, they accumulate through countless small refinements shared among neighbors. Knowledge itself begins acquiring permanence. Children observe experienced builders repairing walls year after year. They watch older relatives mixing plaster, shaping mud bricks, replacing roof beams, and reinforcing foundations before winter arrives. Skills once adapted primarily to movement increasingly focus upon maintenance improvement and durability. Learning becomes rooted in place. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these early villages is how ordinary they appear. Modern imagination often expects history to change through dramatic inventions or spectacular events. Archaeology repeatedly suggests something quieter. Humanity's greatest transformations frequently occur because countless practical decisions continue in the same direction over many generations. Someone decides to repair a cracked wall rather than abandon it. Someone gathers extra clay before the rainy season. Someone builds a storage bin slightly larger than the previous one. Someone teaches a child how to smooth fresh plaster across a floor. None of these actions seems historically important. Together they alter the trajectory of civilization. Scholars still debate exactly when a permanent settlement becomes a true village. There is no universal threshold measured by population or building density. Some communities remain small for centuries while displaying unmistakable permanence. Others grow rapidly before disappearing just as quickly. Human history refuses simple definitions. What survives instead is a picture of gradual confidence. Each rebuilt house quietly declares that tomorrow matters. Each repaired roof expresses belief in another winter. Each carefully maintained hearth assumes that future generations will stand where earlier ones once stood. By building homes from Earth itself, these communities do more than protect themselves from the elements. They begin anchoring human memory into the landscape, creating places capable of outliving the people who first shape them. Long before cities dominate horizons, before kings claim territories, before writing records' names, the earliest villages discover a powerful truth. A house can preserve far more than shelter. It can preserve a way of life. By the time the sun climbs above the eastern hills, the village is already awake. Smoke curls through openings in flat roofs. Fires that never fully die during the night are stirred back to life with dry reeds and twigs. The air carries the familiar mixture of damp earth, wood smoke, crushed grain animal hides, and freshly baked flatbread. Dogs weave quietly between houses, alert but relaxed. Somewhere a child laughs. Nearby a stone grinder begins its steady rhythm, a sound so ordinary that no one notices it anymore. Nothing remarkable appears to be happening, yet almost every aspect of daily life is unlike anything humanity has experienced before. For countless generations, survival has depended on movement. Now survival increasingly depends on routine. The rhythm of the day begins with work that cannot be postponed. Water must be collected while temperatures remain cool. Food stored through previous seasons is inspected for moisture insects or rodents. Hearths need tending. Simple repairs to walls or roofs are often completed before the stronger afternoon sun hardens fresh mud plaster too quickly. Even the smallest tasks become part of a predictable cycle, repeated day after day, season after season. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that this regularity slowly transforms how people think about time itself. In highly mobile societies, daily life follows the changing availability of resources across vast landscapes. In permanent villages, many tasks become tied to the same place. The same grinding stone is used every morning. The same hearth is cleaned each evening. The same storage bins are opened and sealed again. The same paths connect neighbouring houses. Repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates efficiency. The village begins functioning almost like a living organism. No household is entirely independent. One family may gather reeds for repairing roofs, while another prepares clay for fresh plaster. Skilled stone workers produce sharper blades that circulate through the settlement. Experienced hunters continue bringing meat from surrounding hills, while others specialize in processing plant foods or maintaining communal spaces. Labor remains flexible rather than rigidly divided, but cooperation becomes increasingly valuable as populations grow. Scholars still debate exactly how specialized these early communities become. The evidence remains incomplete because many tools serve multiple purposes and written records do not yet exist. Nevertheless, differences in craftsmanship suggest that certain individuals develop particular expertise through years of experience. A beautifully shaped flint blade is unlikely to be an accident. The same is true of finely woven baskets capable of protecting grain for months, or carefully polished stone axes that require enormous patience to complete. Such objects hint that knowledge is no longer evenly distributed. Some people simply become better at particular tasks than others, and their skills benefit the entire community. Food preparation occupies an astonishing amount of time. Modern kitchens hide much of the labor required to produce a meal. In the first villages, every stage demands physical effort. Wild grains or early cultivated cereals must be cleaned by hand. Husks are removed using pounding stones. Seeds are ground into coarse flour across heavy stone querns, sometimes for hours each day. Water is added gradually until dough forms. Flat loaves are baked directly upon heated stones or inside simple clay ovens. The repetitive movement of grinding grain leaves permanent marks upon the human body. Archaeologists studying skeletons from early villages often find worn joints, enlarged muscle attachments, and distinctive patterns of stress in the arms, shoulders, knees, and lower back. Teeth frequently display unusual wear caused by tiny particles of stone entering flour during grinding. Daily routines literally reshape the skeleton. These ancient bones preserve invisible histories of ordinary work. Children participate from an early age, although probably in ways appropriate to their growing abilities. They gather firewood, collect edible plants close to the settlement, carry small containers of water, and observe older relatives performing more complex tasks. Learning rarely occurs through formal instruction. Instead, knowledge passes through constant participation. Skills accumulate naturally as children imitate adults whose own abilities have been refined over decades. Old age also begins acquiring a different meaning. In highly mobile communities, physical endurance is often essential for survival. Permanent settlements allow elderly individuals to remain active contributors even after long-distance travel becomes difficult. Their value increasingly lies in memory. They remember where floods reached decades earlier. They recognize changing weather patterns. They understand how to repair damaged buildings, preserve food, identify medicinal plants, or settle disputes within families. Knowledge grows alongside age. This accumulation of experience may become one of the earliest forms of social wealth. The village also changes family life in subtle but significant ways. Relatives who once separate during seasonal migrations now spend much longer periods together. Neighbouring households witness births, illnesses, celebrations, and deaths in close succession. Friendships deepen through repeated daily contact. Disagreements become more complicated because simply walking away is no longer the easiest solution. Living together demands patience. Archaeological evidence occasionally hints at efforts to maintain harmony. Open spaces between houses may serve communal activities. Shared ovens appear in some settlements. Large hearths suggest collective food preparation during certain occasions. While no single explanation fully accounts for every arrangement, cooperation clearly becomes an increasingly valuable survival strategy. Animals occupy a growing place within village life as well. Dogs have already accompanied humans for thousands of years, helping with hunting, warning against danger, and perhaps offering companionship. In many early villages, they continue fulfilling these roles, scavenging food scraps while remaining close to human households. Their bones frequently appear among archaeological remains, providing quiet testimony to one of humanity's oldest partnerships. Wild sheep-goats, pigs and cattle still roam surrounding landscapes, although relationships with some species are beginning to change. At this stage, hunting remains extremely important, yet certain animal populations experience increasing human influence. Scholars continue debating precisely when management becomes full domestication, because the transition unfolds gradually rather than suddenly. The evidence suggests experimentation rather than certainty. People learn which young animals are easiest to handle. They observe seasonal breeding cycles. They discover that some species tolerate human presence better than others. Countless practical observations slowly accumulate, laying foundations for changes that will eventually reshape agriculture. Evenings bring a different pace. Work rarely ends entirely, but activity softens as temperatures fall. Fires provide warmth and light inside houses whose thick earthen walls retain heat surprisingly well. Meals are shared, tools are repaired, baskets are woven, animal hides are scraped smooth. Children drift towards sleep while older generations continue quieter tasks beside the glow of the hearth. No written stories survive from these gatherings, yet the human need to share memory almost certainly does. Around these fires, landscapes become stories. Ancestors are remembered. Successful hunts are recalled. Dangerous floods, unusual animals, distant mountains, and neighboring communities become part of collective knowledge. Oral traditions preserve information far beyond the lifespan of any individual. Every generation inherits not only practical skills, but a growing sense of belonging to both place and people. The village becomes an archive without books. It stores knowledge inside architecture, shared routines, remembered paths, familiar seasons, and human relationships. Every repaired wall contains lessons from earlier builders. Every storage pit reflects past harvests. Every child learns by repeating movements perfected long before birth. Perhaps the greatest achievement of these first villages is not farming architecture or technology. It is continuity. For the first time on a significant scale, human communities begin living in ways where tomorrow is expected to resemble yesterday, where knowledge accumulates instead of constantly moving, and where memory becomes embedded not only in people, but in the places they create together. The village no longer exists merely as a collection of houses. It has become a shared rhythm of life. The first fields do not appear as endless stretches of neatly ordered crops reaching toward the horizon. There are no fences dividing vast farms, no ploughs cutting deep furrows across the earth, and no certainty that every seed planted will survive. Instead, cultivation begins almost invisibly. A patch of ground beside a familiar settlement is cleared of shrubs. Wild grasses that produce larger seeds are harvested more carefully than others. Useful plants growing close to homes are protected instead of uprooted. Seeds left behind from previous harvests sprout naturally the following season, encouraging people to scatter a few more in favorable places. Generation after generation, small acts of observation slowly become deliberate practice. The transformation is so gradual that those living through it may never recognize it as a revolution. For countless centuries, hunter-gatherers possess an intimate understanding of plants. They know which roots remain edible after winter frost, which berries ripen first, which grasses survive drought, and which seeds store well through difficult seasons. Farming does not emerge because people suddenly discover plants. It emerges because they begin changing the relationship between themselves and the plants they already know. Archaeological evidence from the Fertile Crescent suggests that communities harvest wild cereals thousands of years before those plants become fully domesticated. Flint sickle blades often display a distinctive glossy sheen created by repeatedly cutting grasses rich in silica. Grinding stones become larger and more numerous. Charred grains accumulate within hearths and storage pits. Together, these discoveries reveal increasing dependence upon cereals, even while hunting and gathering continue playing major roles. What survives in the archaeological record suggests patience rather than urgency. No single explanation fully accounts for why cultivation expands. Climate change likely contributes by creating more stable growing conditions after the last ice age. Rising populations may increase pressure upon naturally available food. Permanent settlements encourage people to invest labor in nearby landscapes. Each factor probably reinforces the others. Scholars still debate their relative importance because different regions follow different paths. The evidence refuses a simple story. Some communities continue thriving primarily through hunting and gathering long after neighboring settlements begin cultivating plants. Others experiment with early farming before abandoning it altogether. Human history rarely advances in a straight line. Yet where cultivation succeeds, it begins reshaping the landscape itself. Wild grasses do not naturally grow in dense, carefully maintained patches. Human activity gradually creates such environments. Unwanted shrubs are cleared away. Stones are removed from promising soil. Water collects differently where vegetation changes. Seeds from particularly productive plants are unintentionally favored, because those are the ones most often gathered and replanted. Over centuries, nature responds. The earliest domesticated forms of wheat and barley differ subtly from their wild ancestors. One of the most important changes involves the fragile stems that hold mature seeds. Wild cereals naturally shatter when ripe, scattering seeds across the ground to ensure reproduction. Domesticated varieties increasingly retain their seeds until harvested by people. This characteristic benefits humans enormously, but would disadvantage plants growing entirely without human care. Evolution quietly changes direction, not because anyone understands genetics, but because repeated human choices gradually influence which plants survive and reproduce. The same slow process begins affecting animals. Goats browsing rocky hillsides, sheep grazing open grasslands, wild pigs rooting through forests, and powerful wild cattle all remain familiar sources of food. Hunting continues supplying much of the village's meat. Yet archaeological evidence hints that people increasingly manage certain animal populations rather than merely pursuing them. The transition is delicate. Instead of killing every animal encountered, hunters may spare younger females capable of future breeding. Captured offspring can sometimes be raised close to settlements. Herd movements become better understood through years of observation. Animals accustomed to human presence gradually behave differently from entirely wild populations. Scholars continue debating the precise sequence of these developments, because domestication leaves subtle traces at first. Bone measurements reveal gradual reductions in body size. Age profiles of slaughtered animals begin changing, suggesting selective management. Ancient DNA offers additional clues, though many questions remain unresolved. No dramatic boundary separates wild from domestic. The relationship evolves over hundreds of generations. As farming and herding slowly expand, village life acquires a new rhythm governed by growing seasons. Harvest cannot simply be postponed. Seeds must enter the ground at favorable times. Crops require protection from grazing animals. Storage becomes increasingly important because an entire year's effort may depend upon preserving food until the next harvest. Time itself becomes agricultural. The calendar is no longer shaped only by migrating animals or ripening wild fruits. It becomes tied to planting, tending, harvesting, drying, storing, and preparing for another cycle. Every successful season strengthens the connection between community and land. This growing dependence brings remarkable opportunities. Food supplies become more predictable in favorable years. Larger populations can often be supported within relatively small territories. Infants who no longer travel constantly may survive in greater numbers. Villages gradually expand as houses multiply around shared spaces. But every advantage introduces new vulnerabilities. A failed hunt affects a few days. A failed harvest may affect an entire year. Communities now invest enormous labor into crops that remain vulnerable to drought, flood, frost, insects, disease, and unpredictable weather. A single environmental disaster can destroy months of work. Storage softens these dangers but cannot eliminate them. The archaeological record preserves both prosperity and disappointment. Some settlements grow steadily for centuries, suggesting repeated agricultural success. Others experience interruptions, abandonment, or significant decline. Charred layers occasionally indicate accidental fires consuming precious grain stores. Soil studies reveal periods when erosion increases because vegetation has been removed. Environmental pressures begin accumulating almost as soon as cultivation expands. Human beings are not merely adapting to nature anymore. They are actively reshaping it. Forests surrounding villages provide timber for houses, fuel for fires, and raw material for tools. Repeated cutting gradually alters local ecosystems. Fields replace natural vegetation. Animal grazing changes plant communities. Streams may shift slightly as nearby landscapes lose protective ground cover. These transformations remain modest compared with later civilizations, yet they represent the beginning of humanity's lasting influence upon entire environments. Even technology begins responding to agricultural life. Grinding stones become larger and more durable. Sickle blades are repaired repeatedly because successful harvests depend upon efficient cutting. Storage vessels increase in size. Baskets are woven more tightly to protect grain from insects. Clay containers become increasingly common as people seek better methods of preserving valuable food. Innovation follows necessity. None of these inventions appear spectacular in isolation. Together, they support a completely new relationship between people and the earth beneath their feet. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of early farming is how incomplete it remains. Villages do not suddenly become agricultural societies. Hunting continues. Fishing remains important. Gathering wild food still provides vital nutrition and resilience when cultivated crops perform poorly. For thousands of years, humanity lives between two worlds. One world remembers mobility, flexibility, and dependence upon naturally occurring abundance. The other gradually embraces planning, cultivation, storage, and permanent settlement. The balance shifts slowly enough that many generations experience both ways of life simultaneously. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that this blended strategy may actually explain the remarkable success of the first villages. Rather than abandoning ancient knowledge, these communities build upon it. The wisdom accumulated through hundreds of thousands of years as hunter-gatherers becomes the very foundation that allows farming to succeed. The fields surrounding the earliest villages therefore represent something far greater than cultivated land. They are living experiments. Every harvest teaches another lesson. Every season reveals another mistake. Every generation refines practices inherited from those before. Without realizing it, these ordinary villagers are carrying humanity across one of the greatest thresholds in its entire existence. Not through conquest or sudden invention, but through countless careful observations repeated, until the landscape itself begins changing alongside them. The first villages promise stability, but permanence comes with a price that no generation can fully anticipate. A settlement that offers shelter through winter stores, food against hunger, and gathers dozens or even hundreds of people into one place also creates entirely new challenges. These problems do not arrive all at once. Like the villages themselves, they emerge gradually hidden inside ordinary routines until they become impossible to ignore. For most of human history, movement has acted as an invisible form of protection. When food grows scarce, people move. When water sources fail, people move. When waste accumulates or disease threatens, people move. A mobile life rarely allows one place to become overwhelmed by the consequences of human occupation. Permanent villages quietly remove that safeguard. Every day leaves behind something that must be managed. Ash from hearths collects outside homes. Animal bones accumulate after meals. Broken baskets, damaged tools, worn clothing, cracked pottery, and spoiled food gradually create expanding areas of refuse around the settlement. Human waste becomes concentrated instead of scattered across vast landscapes. Rain carries some of it into nearby streams. Dogs and scavenging animals spread other materials through the village. To the people living there, these changes probably seem ordinary. To archaeologists, they reveal one of the first environmental consequences of permanent settlement. Excavations frequently uncover thick layers of discarded material surrounding early homes. Far from being signs of disorder alone, these deposits tell stories about daily habits, seasonal routines, and changing diets. They also hint at an increasingly complicated relationship between humans and the spaces they inhabit. Waste becomes a permanent companion. Alongside these practical problems comes another invisible challenge: disease. For hundreds of thousands of years, small mobile groups naturally limit the spread of many infectious illnesses. A contagious disease often struggles to move through scattered populations that frequently separate from one another. Permanent villages change these conditions completely. People sleep closer together. Children play together every day. Food is prepared in shared spaces. Animals remain near human homes. Water sources are used repeatedly by larger populations. Although the evidence remains incomplete, archaeologists and biological anthropologists believe that these changing conditions gradually increase opportunities for parasites and infectious diseases to circulate. Many of the great epidemic illnesses familiar from later history require populations much larger than these early villages, but smaller-scale infections almost certainly become more common. The human skeleton quietly records this burden. Bones recovered from early farming communities sometimes display signs of nutritional stress, chronic infection, or interrupted childhood growth. Such evidence must be interpreted carefully because preservation varies greatly, and no single explanation fully accounts for every pattern. Even so, researchers repeatedly observe that the transition toward permanent settlement is not always accompanied by better health. In some places, life becomes harder. This conclusion surprises many people. Agriculture appears capable of producing more food than hunting and gathering, yet quantity does not always equal quality. Hunter-gatherer diets often include remarkable diversity: fish, wild game, fruits, nuts, roots, seeds, birds, shellfish, and seasonal plants. Early farming communities increasingly rely upon a smaller number of staple crops such as wheat and barley. These foods provide dependable calories. They do not always provide complete nutrition. As dependence upon cereals grows, dietary variety may decline. Deficiencies become more likely during poor harvests. Tooth decay appears more frequently because carbohydrate-rich foods remain in contact with teeth far longer than many traditional diets. Archaeological studies consistently find increases in dental cavities among some early agricultural populations. The smile of civilization begins carrying new scars. Children are especially vulnerable. A failed harvest affects everyone, but growing bodies require constant nourishment. Skeletons of young individuals occasionally reveal periods when normal growth slows before partially recovering later. These interruptions suggest episodes of nutritional stress that families somehow survive. The village protects. The village also exposes. Meanwhile, another subtle transformation unfolds inside human society. As houses become permanent and stored, food accumulates. Differences between households begin appearing more clearly than before. Some families possess larger storage facilities, others maintain better-built homes. Certain individuals appear associated with unusually fine tools or decorative objects. Scholars still debate how much inequality truly exists within the earliest villages. The evidence remains mixed. Many communities appear remarkably egalitarian compared with later civilizations. Others hint that wealth, influence, or status is beginning to concentrate in subtle ways. Because written records do not yet exist, archaeologists must rely upon architecture, burials, and household remains to reconstruct these social relationships. The picture that emerges is complex rather than uniform. Some villages maintain impressive levels of cooperation despite growing populations. Others reveal signs of increasing division. Storage itself may contribute to these changes. When food exists only in today's hunt or today's gathered plants, long-term accumulation is difficult. Once grain can be stored for months or even years, households capable of producing or protecting larger surpluses may gain advantages over others. Surplus creates opportunity. It also creates temptation. The archaeological record offers occasional hints of conflict, though interpreting violence from ancient remains is never straightforward. Some skeletons bear healed fractures consistent with interpersonal injury. Others display more severe trauma. Defensive structures begin appearing at certain settlements, although scholars disagree about whether these are built primarily against human enemies, wild animals flooding, or multiple threats combined. No single explanation fully accounts for every wall or ditch. Human communities have always experienced disagreements. Permanent settlement simply changes the consequences. Neighbors cannot easily avoid one another. Disputes over water storage, cultivated land, or hunting territories become increasingly significant when families expect to remain together indefinitely. Cooperation remains essential. So does conflict resolution. Environmental pressures also begin accumulating in unexpected ways. Fields cultivated repeatedly without adequate recovery gradually lose fertility. Trees surrounding villages disappear faster than they regenerate if timber demand becomes too great. Hunting near permanent settlements may reduce local wildlife populations, forcing hunters to travel greater distances. Archaeological pollen studies reveal subtle changes in vegetation around some early settlements. Forest species decline while grasses associated with human disturbance increase. Charcoal layers indicate repeated burning of vegetation to clear land. Rivers occasionally carry greater amounts of eroded soil where natural plant cover has been removed. Humanity begins altering landscapes not only through construction but through persistence. The changes remain local, yet they foreshadow processes that will eventually reshape entire continents. Psychological life may also change in ways archaeology can only glimpse. Permanent homes encourage deeper emotional attachment to specific places. Losing such a settlement through drought, flood, or fire becomes far more devastating than abandoning a temporary camp. The house contains years of labor. The surrounding fields embody countless seasons of work. Ancestors may lie buried beneath nearby floors. Memory itself becomes rooted in the landscape. Leaving is no longer simple. Despite these growing challenges, villages continue spreading. Why? Because even with all their hidden costs, they offer possibilities that previous ways of life cannot easily provide. Larger communities preserve knowledge more effectively. Cooperative labour supports ambitious building projects. Food storage reduces some forms of uncertainty. Children inherit stable environments where practical skills accumulate across generations. The advantages remain compelling. The disadvantages become the price of permanence. Perhaps the greatest lesson preserved beneath these ancient settlements is that every solution creates new problems. Humanity does not leave behind hardship by building villages. It merely exchanges one set of uncertainties for another. The endless search for migrating herds slowly gives way to anxiety over harvests. Freedom of movement yields to responsibility for homes. Scattered camps become crowded neighborhoods. Flexible survival strategies become organized routines requiring constant maintenance. Civilization does not begin with perfection. It begins with compromise. The earliest villagers cannot foresee where these compromises will ultimately lead. They simply repair another wall, inspect another storage pit, clear another field, and prepare once again for changing seasons. Yet beneath these ordinary acts, a new kind of human society is taking shape. One resilient enough to endure for generations, but complex enough to carry the first shadows of inequality, environmental strain and social tension that will accompany civilization ever after. From a distance, the settlement appears almost featureless against the broad Anatolian plain. There are no towering gates, no royal palaces, no broad avenues lined with monuments. Instead, hundreds of mud brick houses stand pressed tightly together, their flat roofs merging into what looks like one enormous platform rising gently above the surrounding land. Smoke escapes through openings in the ceilings. Ladders lean against rooftops. People walk not through streets but across the tops of their own homes. It is one of the most extraordinary communities of the ancient world. Today it is known as Çatalhöyük. Long before the first pyramids rise beside the Nile, long before Stonehenge reaches its familiar form, long before writing records kings and battles, thousands of people are already living together here in what many archaeologists consider one of the world's earliest large proto-urban settlements. Occupied for roughly 12 centuries beginning around 7,400 years before the Common Era, Çatalhöyük offers an astonishing window into a moment when humanity is still discovering what permanent community truly means. The settlement does not resemble later cities. That difference may be its greatest lesson. Approaching from the surrounding plain, visitors would find almost no streets at ground level. Houses are built wall against wall, sharing side walls with neighbouring structures, until the entire settlement resembles an immense honeycomb of mud brick. Instead of walking between buildings, residents climb ladders to their roofs and move across the settlement from above. Every roof becomes a pathway. The main entrance to each house is not a doorway cut into a wall, but an opening in the ceiling. Ladders descend into living spaces below, reducing exposed entrances that might weaken walls or allow easier access for unwanted animals. The design also helps preserve warmth during colder months and creates remarkably efficient use of limited space. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that this unusual arrangement is maintained for centuries. No single explanation fully accounts for why the settlement develops this way. Some scholars argue that tightly packed construction conserves valuable building materials and heat. Others suggest it reflects traditions inherited from earlier settlements. A few researchers propose that elevated movement across rooftops provides additional security, though definitive evidence remains elusive. As with so much of prehistory, several factors may work together rather than any single cause explaining everything. Descending into one of these houses reveals an interior far more sophisticated than its modest exterior suggests. Walls are carefully plastered until they appear smooth and almost luminous in the filtered daylight entering through the roof opening. Raised platforms line portions of the room, serving multiple purposes throughout the day. During waking hours, they become workspaces, seating areas, or places for food preparation. At night, they transform into sleeping platforms covered with woven mats and animal skins. The organization feels deliberate. Storage bins occupy designated areas. Hearths remain positioned where smoke can escape efficiently through the ceiling opening. Work areas are separated from cleaner domestic spaces. Everything reflects generations of practical refinement. The houses are rebuilt repeatedly. When a structure becomes unstable or too damaged to repair, it is carefully leveled, and another house rises directly above it. Over many centuries, this process gradually elevates the entire settlement into the large mound visible today. Archaeologists excavating Çatalhöyük move downward through layer after layer of rebuilding, almost like turning pages in an immense architectural diary. Yet the buildings themselves tell only part of the story. Inside many homes, researchers discover something unexpected. The dead remain among the living. Beneath sleeping platforms and house floors lie carefully prepared burials. Adults, children, and infants are interred beneath the very spaces where everyday life continues above. Some houses contain only a few burials. Others preserve dozens accumulated across generations. This practice transforms the meaning of home. A house is no longer simply where a family lives. It also becomes where memory resides. Exactly why certain individuals are buried beneath particular houses remains uncertain. Scholars still debate whether these people represent biological relatives, respected community members, or social groups connected through more complex relationships. The evidence remains incomplete, yet one pattern appears repeatedly. The boundary between daily life and ancestral remembrance is remarkably small. Every meal prepared above a hearth unfolds only a short distance above earlier generations. Death is not removed from community life. It becomes woven into it. Even more intriguing are the walls themselves. Some houses contain elaborate paintings executed with red ochre black pigments and white plaster. Geometric patterns decorate interior surfaces. Handprints appear pressed into fresh plaster thousands of years ago. Scenes interpreted as hunting events, wild animals, and symbolic imagery survive in fragmentary form. Among the most famous discoveries are installations featuring the skulls and horns of wild aurochs, the massive ancestors of modern cattle. These powerful animals dominate parts of the interior architecture. Horn cores project dramatically from plastered benches or walls, creating striking visual features unlike ordinary household decoration. Leopards, vultures, wild bulls, and other impressive animals appear in artistic representations throughout the settlement. Their meaning remains one of Çatalhöyük's greatest mysteries. Some researchers interpret these installations as evidence of household ritual rather than centralized religion. Others argue they express family identity, ancestral memory, or symbolic relationships between humans and powerful wild creatures. No written explanations survive. Every interpretation remains tentative. What becomes increasingly clear, however, is that spiritual life does not seem confined to separate temples. Instead, it unfolds inside ordinary homes, cooking, sleeping, crafting, remembering ancestors, and engaging with symbolic imagery. All occur within the same domestic spaces. The sacred and the everyday exist side by side. Another remarkable feature of Çatalhöyük is what appears to be missing. Despite supporting a population that may have reached several thousand people, archaeologists find surprisingly little evidence for monumental public buildings, royal residences, or obvious centers of political authority. House after house shares remarkably similar size and quality. While differences certainly exist, extreme inequality remains difficult to identify. Scholars continue debating whether this apparent equality reflects genuine social organization or simply limitations of the surviving evidence. No single explanation fully accounts for how such a large community coordinates construction, food production, trade, and social life without clear signs of centralized government. Perhaps leadership exists but leaves few archaeological traces. Perhaps authority rotates among respected individuals. Perhaps cooperation itself proves stronger than later civilizations often assume. The evidence does not yet allow certainty. Trade nevertheless flourishes. Çatalhöyük sits within networks extending hundreds of kilometers. Obsidian from nearby volcanic regions is shaped into extraordinarily sharp blades, prized across much of Southwest Asia. Marine shells arrive from distant coastlines. Pigment, stone, and other materials circulate through exchange systems linking communities separated by formidable landscapes. Even without cities or written commerce connections stretch surprisingly far, the settlement is never isolated. Daily life continues through familiar routines. Women and men grind grain, prepare meals, repair walls, weave baskets, craft stone tools, shape bone implements, and care for children. Hunters still pursue wild animals despite increasing reliance upon domesticated resources. Sheep and goats become more common through time, while wild cattle remain symbolically important, long after they become less significant as everyday prey. The old world and the new continue overlapping. This balance may explain much of Çatalhöyük's remarkable longevity. It embraces permanence without completely abandoning earlier traditions. It develops complexity without obvious kings. It sustains thousands of residents without monumental government buildings. It creates extraordinary symbolic art without written language. For more than a millennium, generation after generation climbs across the same rooftops, descends the same ladders, replasters the same walls, buries loved ones beneath familiar floors, and quietly expands one of humanity's most fascinating experiments in communal living. Even today, after thousands of years buried beneath Anatolian soil, Çatalhöyük refuses to surrender all of its secrets. Its houses still whisper of a civilization before cities, reminding us that the earliest villages are never merely collections of buildings. They are laboratories where humanity learns, often through trial and error, how to live together on an entirely new scale. If Çatalhöyük reveals how large and surprisingly complex an early farming community can become, another settlement tells an equally remarkable story from a very different landscape. At the edge of the Jordan Valley, where fresh water emerges from powerful springs before flowing toward one of the lowest places on Earth, people begin returning to the same location, thousands of years before written history. Over countless generations they rebuild, expand, abandon, and return, again leaving behind one of the longest continuous archaeological records ever discovered. Today that place is known as Jericho. Its history reaches so deeply into the past that it almost seems to exist outside ordinary historical time. Long before pharaohs rule Egypt, before the first dynasty appear in Mesopotamia, before bronze weapons reshape warfare, families are already living beside Jericho's dependable spring. The water never becomes merely convenient. It becomes the reason the settlement survives. Across much of Southwest Asia, permanent water determines everything. Seasonal streams vanish. Rainfall fluctuates dramatically. Entire landscapes change character between winter and summer. A spring that flows throughout the year offers something almost priceless: predictability. For communities gradually embracing permanent settlement, dependable water means crops can survive dry seasons, animals can be sustained, and daily life no longer revolves entirely around uncertain rainfall. It allows people to imagine futures measured in generations rather than in the next migration. The spring beneath Jericho quietly transforms geography into destiny. Archaeological excavations reveal occupation extending back to around 10,000 years before the Common Era, placing Jericho among the oldest known permanently inhabited places on Earth. The earliest inhabitants are not yet living in a recognizable city. Their homes are modest, often circular structures built from mud brick resting upon stone foundations. Roofs consist of timber reeds and packed earth. Like other early villages, the architecture appears practical rather than monumental. Yet beneath this simplicity lies remarkable ambition. the settlement gradually grows. Families repair older buildings instead of abandoning them. Fresh structures rise atop earlier foundations. Refuse accumulates. Floors are replastered. Burials continue beneath domestic spaces. Century after century, the ground itself rises through repeated human occupation, eventually forming the substantial archaeological mound visible today. Every generation literally elevates the history beneath its feet. Then something extraordinary appears. At some point during Jericho's early development, its inhabitants construct a massive stone wall accompanied by an equally impressive tower. Even after decades of excavation, these structures continue provoking debate. The wall surrounds part of the settlement and in places reaches several meters in height. Nearby stands a circular stone tower, approximately 8 meters tall, containing an internal staircase built with surprising precision. For people possessing only stone tools and human labor, the construction represents an enormous communal effort. Thousands upon thousands of stones must be gathered. Foundations require careful preparation. Labor must be coordinated. Food must sustain the workers. Someone has to organize the project. Why? That simple question has fascinated archaeologists for generations. The traditional explanation proposes defense. A wall naturally suggests protection against hostile neighbors. Permanent settlements possess stored food, valuable tools, and increasingly important resources worth defending. As populations grow, conflict may become more likely. Building a wall could therefore represent one of humanity's earliest organized responses to communal security. It is an appealing theory, yet the evidence remains incomplete. No clear signs of sustained warfare accompany the earliest phases of Jericho's wall. Weapons alone cannot explain such an enormous investment of labor. Other possibilities therefore deserve equal attention. Some scholars argue that the wall primarily protects against flooding. Seasonal water descending from nearby hills could threaten low-lying portions of the settlement. A substantial barrier might redirect dangerous flows while simultaneously retaining valuable soil. Others focus on the tower itself. Its internal staircase aligns in intriguing ways with the surrounding landscape and the setting sun during certain times of the year. A few researchers suggest astronomical or ceremonial functions, though these interpretations remain actively debated. No single explanation fully accounts for every architectural feature. Perhaps the wall serves several purposes simultaneously: protection from floods, control of movement, community identity, shared labor, practical engineering, symbolic meaning. The truth may lie somewhere between these possibilities. Regardless of its original purpose, one conclusion appears unavoidable. Building the wall changes the community itself. Large construction projects require cooperation extending far beyond individual families. Workers must gather materials, transport stones, prepare food, and maintain daily life while construction continues. Such efforts strengthen social bonds even if their immediate purpose remains uncertain. The wall therefore becomes more than architecture. It becomes evidence that human cooperation has reached an entirely new scale. Life inside the settlement continues evolving alongside these ambitious projects. Grinding stones, storage facilities, hearths, and domestic tools reveal familiar routines centered upon food preparation, construction, and family life. Hunting remains important, though cultivated plants increasingly contribute to everyday nutrition. Goats and sheep appear with growing frequency among animal remains as domestication advances. The old relationship between humanity and nature continues changing one careful season at a time. Among Jericho's most remarkable discoveries are objects far more intimate than its towering stone architecture. Inside several buildings, archaeologists uncover carefully modelled human skulls. After death, certain skulls are separated from their bodies, covered with fine plaster, to recreate facial features and decorated with shells placed where eyes once looked upon the living. These haunting faces remain among the most unforgettable artifacts of early prehistory. their purpose remains uncertain. Many researchers interpret them as expressions of ancestor veneration, preserving the identities of respected individuals long after death. Others suggest they reinforce family continuity, social memory, or household ritual. No written explanation survives. The evidence speaks only through careful craftsmanship. Whoever creates these plastered faces invests extraordinary patience and skill. Every contour of the cheeks, every curve of the nose, every carefully positioned shell. The dead are not forgotten. They continue participating in community life through memory made visible. This relationship between the living and their ancestors echoes patterns already seen elsewhere in the early Neolithic world. Burials beneath houses, preserved skulls, and repeated occupation of familiar places all suggest that permanence transforms not only economics, but emotion. A village becomes a place where generations overlap. Children grow where grandparents once lived. Homes rise above earlier homes. Ancestors remain physically present beneath daily routines. Time itself begins accumulating within a single landscape. Trade also reaches Jericho from surprisingly distant regions. Obsidian arrives from volcanic areas hundreds of kilometers away. Marine shells travel inland despite the settlement lying far from the sea. Decorative stones and pigments suggest exchange networks, linking communities separated by mountains, deserts, and river valleys. Even these early villages are never isolated. Ideas travel alongside objects. Building techniques spread. Seeds move between settlements. Knowledge crosses remarkable distances without maps writing or formal roads. Jericho therefore represents far more than an unusually old settlement. It demonstrates that permanence encourages ambition. Communities begin imagining projects impossible for highly mobile groups. Massive walls, stone towers, long-distance trade, carefully preserved ancestors, generations link through shared architecture. Scholars still debate many aspects of Jericho's earliest history, and new excavations continue refining older interpretations. Yet one truth remains unmistakable. The first villages are no longer simple experiments in survival. They have become enduring communities capable of transforming entire landscapes, organizing monumental labor, preserving collective memory, and creating traditions that outlive every individual who helps build them. Standing beside Jericho's ancient spring today, the water continues flowing much as it did 10,000 years ago. Everything around it changes. Empires rise and disappear. Languages emerge and fade. Religions transform. Kingdoms conquer one another. Yet beneath all those later histories remains the quiet achievement of the first villagers, who recognized that this place, unlike countless camps, before it is worth returning to again and again until it becomes one of humanity's oldest homes. Long before temples dominate city skylines, before priests record ceremonies on clay tablets, and before monumental sanctuaries gather thousands of worshippers, the spiritual life of the first villages unfolds inside ordinary homes. The sacred is not separated from daily existence. It shares the same rooms where grain is ground, children are raised, meals are prepared, and roofs are repaired after heavy rain. To understand these early communities, it is not enough to study their tools or their fields. It is also necessary to understand how they remember the dead, interpret the natural world, and give meaning to lives increasingly rooted in one place. Permanent settlement changes humanity's relationship with memory. For mobile hunter-gatherers, memory often travels through stories carried across landscapes. Rivers, mountains, and migration routes become living maps of ancestral experience. Villages introduce another possibility. Memory can now remain physically anchored to a specific location. A house stands where parents once lived. A hearth continues burning where grandparents once cooked. Every repaired wall quietly preserves traces of earlier generations. Death no longer requires leaving people behind. Instead, the dead remain astonishingly close. Across numerous Neolithic settlements in Southwest Asia, archaeologists repeatedly discover burials beneath house floors. Adults, children, and infants rest below sleeping platforms, beside hearths, or underneath spaces where daily life continues almost uninterrupted. The practice appears so consistently that it cannot be dismissed as coincidence, yet its precise meaning remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. Scholars still debate why these burials occur inside homes rather than in separate cemeteries. One interpretation emphasizes family continuity. Ancestors remain physically present within the household, reinforcing connections between generations. Another suggests that houses themselves become symbols of lineage, with burials strengthening claims to particular homes or neighborhoods. Others argue that practical considerations, ritual traditions, or multiple overlapping beliefs may all contribute. No single explanation fully accounts for every discovery. What survives in the archaeological record nevertheless reveals something remarkable. The boundary between the living and the dead appears far less rigid than in many later civilizations. Everyday life unfolds directly above earlier generations. Children play where ancestors are buried. Meals are prepared over foundations containing family history. Time becomes layered inside the home itself. At Jericho, this relationship takes an especially striking form through the famous plastered skulls. Faces carefully reconstructed with lime plaster shells, replacing eyes, and delicate modelling around the cheeks suggest an extraordinary investment of time and care. These are not casual memorials, they require specialized skill and repeated attention. The individuals represented by these skulls remain unknown. Their names disappear thousands of years ago. Whether they are respected elders, family leaders, ritual figures, or beloved relatives cannot be determined with certainty. Yet whoever creates these objects clearly intends to preserve identity beyond death. Memory acquires a physical form. Similar practices appear elsewhere, though never in exactly the same way. Archaeology reveals remarkable regional diversity rather than a single shared religious system. Some communities emphasize decorated houses, others produce symbolic figurines. Certain settlements display elaborate wall paintings, while neighboring villages leave almost no artistic evidence at all. The spiritual landscape of the Neolithic world is surprisingly varied. Among the most discussed discoveries are the small clay and stone figurines found across several early settlements. Some depict women with pronounced hips and breasts. Others represent men-animals or highly abstract human forms. These objects have inspired decades of interpretation. Earlier generations of archaeologists often described them confidently as fertility goddesses. Today such certainty has largely disappeared. The evidence remains incomplete. Some figurines may indeed relate to fertility, pregnancy, or agricultural abundance. Others could represent ancestors, household rituals, children's toys, teaching objects, or symbolic identities that modern researchers no longer fully understand. Their meanings may even differ from one village to another. The temptation to assign a single universal purpose has gradually given way to greater caution. The first villages almost certainly possess beliefs far more complex than simple labels can capture. Animals occupy an especially important place within this symbolic world. Wild bulls, leopards, vultures, foxes, wild boar deer, and birds appear repeatedly in artwork and architectural decoration. Interestingly, some of these species are hunted frequently while others are encountered far less often. Their symbolic importance, therefore, does not always match their practical value as food. Power seems to matter as much as usefulness. The massive wild aurochs ancestor of modern cattle provides one striking example. Although increasingly replaced by domesticated livestock in later periods, the wild animal retains enormous symbolic presence in settlements like Çatalhöyük. Horns are mounted within houses. Images of powerful bulls appear on walls. Their size, strength, and unpredictability may have carried meanings extending far beyond ordinary hunting. Nature is not simply a resource. It is also a source of identity, imagination, and spiritual significance. The changing seasons reinforce this relationship. Villagers become deeply familiar with recurring cycles of rain, harvest flowering plants, migrating birds, and animal breeding. Successful crops depend upon weather beyond human control. Rivers occasionally flood without warning. Drought threatens entire communities. Storms destroy carefully maintained roofs. Daily survival constantly reminds people that human effort alone cannot guarantee success. Although written prayers do not yet exist, it is difficult to imagine that such uncertainty leaves no influence upon belief. The archaeological record occasionally preserves traces of communal gatherings as well. Certain buildings appear larger or more elaborately decorated than surrounding houses, though their exact functions remain debated. Some researchers interpret them as special meeting places. Others argue they remain ordinary homes belonging to influential families. Again, certainty proves elusive. Prehistory rarely offers simple answers. Instead, it presents patterns requiring careful interpretation. One particularly fascinating aspect of early village spirituality is how little evidence exists for centralized religious authority. Unlike later civilizations, there are few unmistakable temples, monumental sanctuaries, or priestly residences dating to the earliest Neolithic communities. Religion, if that word even fully applies, seems remarkably domestic. Sacred activities unfold where people cook, where they sleep, where children grow, where ancestors rest beneath the floor. The separation between ordinary life and ritual that characterizes many later societies has not yet fully emerged. This intimacy extends to architecture itself. Walls are not merely structural. They carry paintings. Floors are not merely practical. They conceal burials. Platforms serve as beds, workspaces, and places above ancestral remains. The house becomes simultaneously home, memorial, workshop, and sacred space. Such integration may reflect one of the defining features of the earliest villages. Community is experienced through everyday repetition rather than grand ceremony. Lighting a hearth each morning, repairing cracked plaster, preparing grain, remembering the dead, teaching children, watching the seasons change. Meaning grows from continuity. Archaeologists increasingly recognize that these ordinary acts often preserve more insight into early belief than spectacular artifacts alone. A carefully maintained burial beneath a floor may reveal more about human identity than an isolated ceremonial object. A repeatedly replastered wall suggests ongoing care extending across generations. Even the decision to rebuild a house upon exactly the same foundation expresses a belief that certain places deserve continuity rather than abandonment. The first villages therefore reshape not only economies and technologies, but emotional life itself. People begin belonging to places in entirely new ways. They inherit houses instead of camps. They remember ancestors through buildings rather than only through stories. They transform landscapes into homes filled with visible and invisible histories. The evidence remains fragmentary and scholars continue debating countless details. Yet beneath every interpretation lies one unmistakable pattern. As humanity settles into permanent villages, memory settles with it. The sacred no longer travels solely across mountains, rivers, and hunting grounds. It settles beneath the floors, within the walls, around the hearths, and inside the ordinary houses where civilization quietly learns that home can preserve far more than shelter. It can preserve an entire way of understanding life, death, and the passage of time. The first villages are often imagined as isolated islands of humanity surrounded by immense wilderness, each community living largely unaware of distant neighbours beyond the next range of hills. At first glance, the archaeological evidence seems to support that picture. Settlements are separated by deserts, forests, mountains, and rivers that require days or even weeks to cross on foot. There are no paved roads, no wheeled carts during much of the early Neolithic, no written maps, and no governments maintaining safe routes between distant communities. Yet beneath the surface, a different story slowly emerges. Tiny objects buried beneath thousands of years of soil begin revealing journeys far longer than anyone once expected. A polished shell appears hundreds of kilometers from the nearest coastline. A blade of volcanic glass is discovered where no volcano exists. Fragments of rare green stone emerge in settlements separated by mountain ranges. None of these materials belongs naturally where archaeologists find them. Someone carries them there. Again and again, these discoveries transform the way scholars understand the world's earliest villages. Rather than isolated experiments, many settlements belong to surprisingly extensive networks of exchange stretching across much of Southwest Asia. Information, materials, and perhaps even people themselves move between communities that never become politically united yet remain connected through repeated contact over generations. One material tells this story better than almost any other: obsidian. To the modern eye, obsidian resembles glossy black glass. In reality, it is volcanic rock formed when molten lava cools so rapidly that crystals never have time to develop. Broken carefully, obsidian produces edges sharper than most modern surgical steel. Long before metal tools appear, it becomes one of the most valuable materials available for making knives, spear points, scrapers, drills, and countless other implements. The problem is simple. Obsidian exists only in specific volcanic regions. Large parts of the Near East contain none at all. Yet archaeologists repeatedly recover obsidian tools from settlements located hundreds of kilometers away from their geological sources. Chemical analysis has revolutionized the study of these objects. Every volcanic source possesses its own distinctive chemical signature, almost like a geological fingerprint. Using modern scientific techniques, researchers compare ancient tools with known volcanic deposits and often identify exactly where the stone originates. The results are remarkable. Many obsidian artifacts found in villages such as Jericho Satalhuyuk and numerous smaller settlements trace their origins to volcanic landscapes in central or eastern Anatolia, requiring journeys of hundreds of kilometers through difficult terrain. No single traveler necessarily completes the entire route. Instead, materials may pass gradually from one community to another, through countless local exchanges moving farther with each generation, until they reach regions unimaginably distant from their place of origin. Trade becomes less like a highway. It resembles a chain of neighboring conversations stretching across continents. Obsidian is only one part of the story. Marine shells found far inland provide equally compelling evidence. Villages hundreds of kilometers from the Mediterranean or the Red Sea contain carefully shaped shells transformed into ornaments, pendants, or decorative objects. Their practical value is limited. They cannot feed a family or build a house. Their importance lies elsewhere. They carry beauty, rarity, identity, perhaps memory of distant places. Their presence suggests that people increasingly value objects beyond immediate survival. Pigments tell another fascinating story. Red ochre, black manganese compounds, white limestone, and other naturally occurring minerals travel considerable distances to decorate houses, bodies, tools, and ritual objects. Color itself becomes something worth acquiring, transporting, and preserving. Human beings are no longer exchanging only necessities. They're exchanging meaning. Archaeologists also recover polished stone axes fashioned from rock types unavailable anywhere near the settlements where they are found. Certain stones are selected not simply because they work well, but because they possess unusual colors, textures, or durability. The movement of these materials reveals remarkable geological knowledge accumulated long before scientific terminology exists. People know where special stones can be found. They know who possesses them. They know how to obtain them. Such networks almost certainly carry far more than physical objects. Ideas travel alongside trade. A more effective method of constructing mud brick walls spreads from one valley to another. New techniques for grinding grain appear across multiple settlements within a few centuries. Different approaches to storing harvests, managing livestock, or producing plaster emerge in places too distant for coincidence alone. Innovation becomes contagious. Unlike genetic inheritance, knowledge can move between unrelated communities with extraordinary speed. The first villages therefore become centers not only of agriculture but of information. One particularly intriguing question concerns how these exchanges actually occur. The archaeological record provides only fragments. Some researchers envision regular seasonal gatherings where neighboring communities meet to exchange goods, arrange marriages, share news, and strengthen alliances. Others argue that most trade occurs gradually through individual families, maintaining long-distance relationships over generations. The evidence remains incomplete. Both processes may operate simultaneously. Marriage itself likely plays an important role. Genetic studies of ancient human remains increasingly suggest that individuals sometimes move between settlements rather than spending their entire lives where they're born. Such movement helps maintain genetic diversity, while also creating social connections linking distant communities. A marriage may unite far more than two people. It may connect entire villages. Language almost certainly changes through these interactions as well. Although no written records preserve the words spoken in these settlements, regular contact between neighboring groups encourages borrowing of vocabulary, technologies, customs, and perhaps even stories. The first villages may therefore belong to cultural landscapes far larger than their physical boundaries suggest. Knowledge no longer remains trapped within one valley. It begins circulating. Trade also introduces new challenges. Valuable materials create competition. Communities located near important obsidian sources may acquire influence through access rather than military power. Relationships require trust. Agreements must be honored. Exchanges depend upon reputations built slowly over repeated encounters. Commerce begins long before coins. It begins with relationships. Perhaps the most striking realization emerging from modern archaeology is how connected these supposedly primitive communities actually become. The world of the early Neolithic is not a collection of isolated dots scattered across empty landscapes. It resembles a growing web. Every exchange blade of obsidian strengthens another thread. Every marine shell carried inland extends another connection. Every shared farming technique spreads another idea. Every marriage links another family across distant regions. Civilization begins weaving itself together long before cities appear. What survives in the archaeological record reminds us that humanity has always possessed a remarkable desire to look beyond the horizon. Even after settling into permanent villages, people continue traveling. Curiosity does not disappear with permanence. It changes direction. Instead of endlessly searching for new campsites, people increasingly travel to maintain relationships, exchange knowledge, acquire rare materials, and strengthen communities separated by mountains, rivers, and deserts. The first villages are therefore never truly alone. Each belongs to a much larger human story unfolding across thousands of kilometers, where every carefully traded stone, every shared innovation, and every enduring friendship quietly prepares the foundations upon which later civilizations will eventually rise. As the first villages spread across fertile valleys, river terraces, and open plains, a quiet transformation begins taking place inside the communities themselves. Their houses become stronger, their harvests become more reliable, their trade networks stretch farther than earlier generations could have imagined. Yet another question grows increasingly important, one that leaves far fewer traces in the archaeological record than walls or stone tools ever could. How do hundreds of people live together without tearing their communities apart? The answer is surprisingly difficult to uncover. Unlike later civilizations, the earliest villages leave behind no written laws, no royal decrees, no lists of officials, and no administrative records describing how decisions are made. There are no surviving titles, identifying chiefs, judges, governors, or councils. The silence of prehistory forces archaeologists to search for answers in architecture, burial customs, patterns of daily life, and subtle differences between households. What emerges is not a single system, but a remarkable diversity of possibilities. One of the first clues comes from the houses themselves. In many early settlements, homes remained surprisingly similar in size. At sites like Çatalhöyük, although some variation certainly exists, archaeologists do not find the enormous palaces or luxurious residences that dominate much later cities. Most families appear to occupy structures built according to comparable designs using similar materials. This apparent equality has fascinated researchers for decades. If thousands of people live together without obvious rulers, how is order maintained? Some scholars argue that these villages operate through extended family groups where authority rests largely with respected elders rather than permanent political leaders. Age brings experience. Those who remember difficult winters, failed harvests, dangerous floods, or successful building techniques naturally acquire influence because their knowledge benefits everyone. Leadership in this view is earned repeatedly rather than inherited automatically. Others propose that authority shifts depending upon circumstance. The most experienced builders may guide construction projects. The finest hunters may organize large expeditions. Individuals skilled at resolving disagreements may become trusted mediators. Knowledge itself becomes a form of leadership. No single explanation fully accounts for every settlement, and the evidence remains incomplete. Different villages almost certainly develop different traditions. Communities separated by hundreds of kilometers need not solve social problems in identical ways. Still, one pattern appears again and again. Cooperation consistently proves more valuable than domination. Building a substantial house requires many hands. Harvesting grain before storms arrive demands coordinated labor. Maintaining irrigation, repairing shared pathways, protecting stored food, and caring for vulnerable members of the community all depend upon mutual effort. The village survives because people continue helping one another. Daily routines reinforce these relationships. Neighbors borrow tools. Families assist one another during construction. Experienced craftspeople teach younger generations. Children grow up surrounded not only by parents but by grandparents, cousins, neighbors, and unrelated adults whose lives remain closely interconnected. Responsibility spreads outward. The archaeological record also preserves evidence of communal work extending beyond individual households. Some settlements contain large open spaces likely used for shared activities. Others display construction projects requiring labor far beyond the capabilities of a single family. Massive walls, towers, drainage systems, or carefully prepared public areas suggest organized cooperation lasting weeks, months, or even years. Such achievements raise another important question. How are people persuaded to contribute? Without written contracts or formal taxation, participation probably depends upon social expectation rather than legal obligation. Helping build a wall today means benefiting from it tomorrow. Repairing communal facilities strengthens the settlement that protects everyone's families. Trust becomes infrastructure. Communities unable to sustain cooperation simply struggle to survive. Food storage introduces additional complexity. A successful harvest can produce surpluses exceeding immediate needs. Those reserves become essential during drought, crop failure, or harsh winters. Yet deciding how surplus food is distributed may not always be straightforward. Should every household retain only what it produces? Should food be shared during difficult years? Do families with greater labor capacity naturally accumulate larger reserves? Scholars continue debating these questions because archaeology offers only indirect evidence. Storage rooms vary in size. Some households possess more grinding stones than others. Certain homes contain greater numbers of valuable objects. These differences may reflect wealth, family size, specialized occupations, or countless other factors that remain invisible after thousands of years. The picture refuses simple interpretation. Even conflict, when it appears, tells a complicated story. Human disagreement is inevitable wherever people live closely together. Competition over water, farmland, hunting territories, livestock or trade relationships almost certainly occurs from time to time. Archaeologists occasionally recover skeletons bearing healed injuries consistent with interpersonal violence. A few settlements show signs of burning or sudden destruction, yet these episodes appear surprisingly limited compared with the dramatic warfare associated with many later civilizations. For long periods, cooperation seems to outweigh conflict. This observation has encouraged some researchers to reconsider long-held assumptions about human nature. The earliest villages are not perfect societies, neither are they constant battlegrounds. Instead, they appear to balance competition and cooperation much as communities continue doing today. Another subtle clue lies in craftsmanship. Certain individuals clearly become exceptionally skilled. Stone blades exhibit extraordinary precision. Bone tools reveal patient refinement. Decorated plaster walls require practiced hands. Basketry grows increasingly sophisticated. Specialization suggests that not everyone performs identical work every day. Even so, these specialists remain deeply integrated within the broader community. A master toolmaker still depends upon farmers for grain. Farmers depend upon builders for secure houses. Builders rely upon hunters, herders, and craftspeople in return. Interdependence strengthens social cohesion. Marriage likely plays an equally important role. Ancient DNA studies increasingly reveal that many villages are not composed entirely of close biological relatives. Individuals move between communities, creating new family connections and reducing the risks associated with long-term isolation. Marriage, therefore, serves more than personal relationships. It becomes diplomacy. Every new family connection extends another bridge between neighboring settlements. These relationships may also help explain how ideas spread so efficiently. A woman arriving from another village brings farming knowledge learned elsewhere. A craftsman marrying into a neighboring settlement introduces different toolmaking techniques. Children inherit traditions from multiple family networks. Innovation quietly follows human relationships. Perhaps the most remarkable achievement of these early communities is not simply that they survive. It is that they remain remarkably adaptable. No written constitution defines their rules. No standing army enforces decisions. No bureaucracy records property or taxes. Instead, order emerges through countless ordinary interactions repeated day after day. Shared meals, collective labor, mutual obligation, reciprocal trust, common memory. The village functions because its people continuously recreate it through everyday behavior. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that civilization begins not with governments, but with relationships. Long before kings claim authority, neighbors learn to cooperate. Long before courts administer justice, families negotiate disputes. Long before official institutions appear, communities discover that living together requires compromise, patience, and shared responsibility. The foundations of organized society are therefore laid not inside palaces or temples, but in modest villages where ordinary people slowly invent ways of balancing individual needs with collective survival. Their solutions are rarely perfect. Many remain hidden forever. Yet without them, no later civilization could ever have existed. For generations, the first villages appear to have found a workable balance. Houses are rebuilt instead of abandoned. Fields continue producing grain. Herds graze nearby hills. Trade networks carry obsidian shells, pigments, and new ideas from one settlement to another. Children grow into adults in places their grandparents already recognize. From within the village, the future may even seem predictable. The landscape has other plans. Nature never promises stability forever. The same rivers that nourish crops can suddenly overflow their banks after unusually heavy rains. Springs that flow reliably for decades may weaken during prolonged dry periods. Forests retreat as people gather timber year after year. Animals alter migration routes. Seasons arrive slightly earlier or later than expected. Small changes barely noticeable in a single year accumulate slowly until entire communities must adapt. The archaeological record repeatedly reminds us that the first villages never exist outside the natural world. They remain deeply dependent upon it. One of the greatest challenges facing modern archaeologists is reconstructing climates that vanished thousands of years ago. Ancient people leave no weather reports. Instead, scientists rely upon tiny clues preserved in unexpected places. Pollen grains trapped within lake sediments reveal which plants dominate different periods. Tree rings record years of abundant growth and years of environmental stress. Layers of cave formations preserve subtle chemical signatures linked to rainfall. Microscopic organisms buried beneath ancient lakes respond to changing temperatures. Together, these fragments allow researchers to reconstruct environmental histories reaching back far beyond written records. What emerges is a picture of remarkable variability. Although the Holocene generally provides a warmer and more stable climate than the Ice Age preceding it, stability never means permanence. Periods of drought interrupt favourable conditions. Cooler intervals return unexpectedly. Local floods reshape river valleys. Entire ecosystems shift as rainfall patterns gradually change. No village can remain unaffected forever. Among the most widely discussed climatic episodes is the event that occurs approximately 8,200 years ago. Geological evidence indicates that large quantities of meltwater from glacial lakes suddenly enter the North Atlantic Ocean, disrupting ocean circulation and triggering a relatively brief but significant cooling event across many regions. Its effects vary considerably. Some places experience cooler temperatures, others receive less rainfall. Growing seasons shorten in certain regions while remaining relatively stable elsewhere. Scholars continue debating exactly how severely individual settlements are affected, because local environments respond differently to broader climatic changes. No single explanation fully accounts for every archaeological site. Even so many researchers believe that communities already practicing farming must adapt rapidly to changing conditions. A poor harvest that occurs once can be survived. Several poor harvests in succession present a far greater challenge. The first response is rarely abandonment. People experiment. Fields may be expanded into more favorable soils. Different crops are cultivated. Wild plants once considered secondary resources become important again. Hunting increases when harvests disappoint. Trade networks provide access to food or materials unavailable locally. Flexibility remains humanity's greatest strength. Even after settling permanently, people never entirely lose the adaptability inherited from countless generations of hunter-gatherer ancestors. This resilience becomes visible in archaeological excavations. Certain settlements display interruptions in occupation followed by renewed construction. Others shrink before expanding again decades later. House designs change gradually. Storage facilities become larger. Animal remains indicate shifting reliance from one species to another. These adjustments reveal communities responding creatively rather than passively. Adaptation often proves more common than collapse. Nevertheless, not every village succeeds. Across Southwest Asia and other early farming regions, archaeologists identify settlements that are eventually abandoned. Sometimes the reasons appear obvious. A river changes course. A spring dries. Agricultural soils become exhausted. At other sites, the explanation remains frustratingly uncertain. No dramatic destruction layer survives. No evidence of invasion appears. People simply leave. The silence left behind becomes one of archaeology's greatest puzzles. Perhaps environmental pressures slowly reduce opportunities until another valley seems more attractive. Perhaps changing trade routes make older locations less valuable. Perhaps internal social tensions encourage families to disperse. The evidence remains incomplete. Entire histories disappear without explanation. Yet abandonment does not necessarily represent failure. One of the greatest misconceptions about early villages is the assumption that permanence means immobility. In reality, many communities remain remarkably flexible. A settlement may thrive for centuries before relocating a short distance to better water, richer soils, or safer ground. Families carry with them building traditions, farming knowledge, social relationships, and spiritual practices developed over generations. The village moves. Its culture continues. Environmental pressure also influences technology. Communities facing declining forests begin using available timber more carefully. Building techniques evolve to reduce material demands. Water management becomes increasingly sophisticated where rainfall grows less dependable. Simple drainage channels, retaining walls, and carefully positioned fields help preserve precious resources. Necessity quietly encourages innovation. Human relationships with animals continue evolving as well. Domesticated sheep and goats often prove more predictable than dependence upon increasingly scarce wild game. Herd management improves. Selective breeding gradually changes animal size, behavior, and productivity. Meanwhile, hunting never disappears entirely. Wild deer, boar birds, and fish continue supplementing village diets across many regions. The balance shifts according to local circumstances. Agriculture remains remarkably diverse. The surrounding landscape records these changes almost as clearly as the settlements themselves. Pollen analysis frequently reveals declining woodland species near long-occupied villages. Grasses associated with grazing animals increase. Charcoal fragments indicate repeated burning to clear vegetation. Soil erosion becomes more pronounced where protective tree cover has been removed. Human influence expands quietly. The first villages are not merely adapting to nature. Nature is adapting to them. For perhaps the first time in history, local ecosystems begin responding not simply to climate, but to sustained human occupation. Fields replace wild grasslands. Footpaths become permanent. Streams are redirected. Animals alter grazing patterns. Plants evolve under repeated cultivation. The partnership between humans and landscapes grows increasingly intertwined. Yet despite all these transformations, uncertainty never disappears. Every planting season still depends upon weather beyond human control. Every harvest still carries risk. Every flood reminds villagers that even carefully built houses remain temporary when measured against geological time. Perhaps this uncertainty explains why early communities continue investing so much effort in cooperation. No family can face prolonged drought entirely alone. Shared labor, shared storage, shared knowledge, and shared memory become essential forms of resilience. The village survives because people face uncertainty together. Looking back across thousands of years, it becomes tempting to imagine that the rise of permanent settlements marks humanity's escape from nature. The archaeological record suggests almost the opposite. Villages deepen humanity's dependence upon local environments. Instead of following migrating resources across continents, communities tie their futures to specific rivers, springs, soils, and seasons. The rewards are extraordinary. So are the risks. Every rebuilt house, every cultivated field, every repaired irrigation channel reflects an enduring act of optimism. The belief that despite floods, droughts, failed harvests, and unpredictable climates, life in this place remains worth preserving for another year, another generation, and another chance to begin again. The change is almost impossible to notice while it is happening. One generation adds a few more houses beside the familiar spring. The next clears another stretch of land beyond the original fields. Children who once play at the edge of the settlement grow into adults building homes for families of their own. Storage rooms become larger. Herds multiply. Paths that begin as narrow trails worn by bare feet gradually widen through thousands of daily journeys. Decades pass, then centuries. Without anyone planning it, the village begins becoming something entirely new. Population is the first quiet signal. The earliest permanent settlements often consist of only a few dozen households. Such communities remain intimate enough that nearly everyone knows everyone else. Shared memories bind the settlement together. Family relationships overlap through marriage cooperation and repeated generations living side by side. Growth changes that balance. As agriculture becomes more dependable and infant survival gradually improves in many regions, villages slowly expand. More people require more houses. More houses demand more building materials. Larger populations consume greater quantities of grain, firewood, water, and grazing land. Every success creates another challenge waiting just beyond the next harvest. The landscape surrounding the settlement changes with it. Fields extend farther from the village centre. Footpaths become permanent routes connecting homes to cultivated land. Woodlands retreat where timber is repeatedly harvested. Seasonal grazing territories expand. The horizon that once feels wild becomes increasingly shaped by human activity. Archaeologists sometimes describe this process as the creation of a cultural landscape. Nature is still present everywhere, yet almost every feature now carries traces of human decisions. A stand of trees survives because generations protect it. A stream follows a slightly altered course after years of small engineering efforts. A hillside remains open because goats graze there every season. The environment itself begins preserving human history. Architecture evolves alongside population. Roundhouses common in some of the earliest villages gradually give way in many regions to rectangular buildings. At first glance, the change appears merely aesthetic. In reality, it transforms how settlements function. Rectangular rooms share walls more efficiently. They waste less space. Storage becomes easier. Buildings connect naturally into orderly clusters. Expanding settlements benefit from this practical geometry. One innovation quietly supports another. Mud brick technology also improves. Builders become increasingly skilled at producing bricks of consistent size, allowing walls to rise faster and remain more stable. Plaster techniques advance. Roofs become stronger. Foundations better withstand seasonal moisture. None of these improvements arrives as a dramatic invention. They emerge through thousands of small refinements passed from experienced builders to younger generations. Knowledge accumulates like the archaeological layers beneath their feet. Meanwhile, agriculture continues changing. Farmers gradually identify seeds producing larger harvests. Livestock become more manageable through selective breeding. Harvesting tools improve. Storage methods reduce losses caused by insects or dampness. Each innovation appears modest on its own. Together, they allow settlements to support populations unimaginable only a few centuries earlier. Specialized work also becomes increasingly visible. Not everyone spends every day producing food. Certain individuals devote remarkable attention to shaping stone tools. Others become especially skilled at basket weaving, plaster preparation, woodworking, or producing ornaments from shell and bone. Craftsmanship grows increasingly sophisticated because larger communities provide both the demand and the opportunity for specialization. A skilled artisan can now exchange work for food produced by others. The economy slowly diversifies. Trade expands in response. Obsidian arrives more regularly. Marine shells appear farther inland. Rare stones travel across mountain ranges. Pigments, textiles, baskets, and perhaps dried food circulate between settlements. Archaeologists increasingly recognize that these exchanges involve not simply goods but information. A new style of house construction spreads from one valley into another. Different methods of animal management appear across neighboring regions. Improved harvesting techniques move between communities through visiting families, marriage networks, and long-distance relationships. Ideas become one of humanity's most valuable resources. Population growth also demands more careful organization. Villages can no longer rely entirely upon informal familiarity. Open spaces begin serving broader communal purposes. Certain locations become associated with food preparation gatherings or specialized activities. Although unmistakable government buildings remain rare, the need for coordination becomes increasingly obvious. Someone organizes communal construction. Someone helps settle disputes. Someone remembers seasonal responsibilities. Leadership grows gradually alongside complexity. The archaeological record continues resisting simple interpretations. Some expanding settlements maintain surprisingly equal housing. Others begin displaying more noticeable differences. Certain families occupy larger structures. Storage capacity varies. Decorative objects become unevenly distributed. Scholars still debate whether these differences represent growing wealth, changing family size, specialized occupations, or emerging social status. The answers remain uncertain. Human society is becoming more layered. Children born into these larger communities experience a different world from their distant ancestors. Their playground extends across dozens or hundreds of neighboring houses. They encounter unfamiliar visitors arriving through trade. They observe craftspeople whose skills differ dramatically from ordinary farming. Their understanding of community expands beyond immediate relatives. Identity itself begins changing. A person belongs not only to a family, they belong to a village, perhaps even to a wider network of neighboring settlements sharing traditions, technologies, and exchange relationships. This broader identity quietly prepares humanity for an even larger transformation. The first towns. Scholars remain cautious about exactly where the boundary lies. No single population size automatically converts a village into a town. No universal architectural feature marks the transition. Instead, the distinction emerges gradually through increasing density, specialization, trade, social organization, and economic complexity. The process resembles dawn rather than sunrise. Light accumulates so slowly that the exact moment of change cannot easily be identified. Some settlements eventually support several thousand inhabitants. Daily life becomes impossible without organized cooperation extending far beyond extended families. Food production must reliably sustain people engaged in non-agricultural work. Construction projects require planning. Trade networks become essential. Knowledge grows increasingly specialized. The foundations of urban civilization quietly assemble themselves. Yet these early towns never completely abandon their village origins. Fields remain close. Livestock continue grazing nearby. Families still gather around domestic hearths. Ancestors remain important. Agriculture continues anchoring daily survival. The village does not disappear. It expands. Looking across thousands of years, the transformation appears almost inevitable. Standing within any single generation, however, it would feel anything but inevitable. No parent tells a child they're witnessing the birth of urban society. No builder realizes that improved mud brick techniques will eventually support cities containing hundreds of thousands of people. No farmer planting carefully selected seeds imagines that agriculture will one day feed civilizations stretching across continents. History rarely announces itself while it's unfolding. It advances through ordinary mornings, through repaired roofs, through expanding fields, through children becoming builders, farmers, artisans, traders, and parents in communities slightly larger than those their grandparents once knew. The first villages therefore accomplish something extraordinary without ever intending to. By solving the practical challenges of permanent life food, shelter cooperation, trade memory, and adaptation, they create the conditions from which towns, cities, kingdoms, and eventually civilizations naturally emerge. The road to urban life is not built by emperors. It begins beneath the bare feet of villagers walking familiar paths between humble mud brick homes, never suspecting that those ordinary journeys are slowly carrying humanity toward an entirely different future. The deeper archaeologists dig into the world's earliest villages, the more remarkable those communities become. Every decade of excavation uncovers another unexpected detail, another carefully preserved flaw, another forgotten burial, another collection of seeds or animal bones that forces long-held assumptions to be reconsidered. Yet with every question answered, several new mysteries emerge. The first villages stand at the edge of written history, leaving behind abundant physical evidence but almost no direct explanation of what their builders believed, feared, or hoped. Silence becomes one of archaeology's greatest challenges. A broken stone blade can reveal how it was shaped. A grain of ancient wheat can identify early farming practices. The foundations of a house can show how people organized domestic space. But none of these discoveries can tell us what someone felt while building that house, planting that field, or burying a loved one beneath the floor. The most important parts of human experience leave the fewest traces. This uncertainty has encouraged generations of researchers to develop increasingly sophisticated methods for reading the ancient past. Microscopic analysis now identifies residues of plants preserved on grinding stones. Chemical studies detect traces of milk fats absorbed into ancient pottery. Ancient DNA reconstructs family relationships and long-distance migrations. Stable isotope analysis reveals childhood diets, patterns of mobility, and even changing environmental conditions. Remote sensing technologies locate buried settlements without disturbing the ground. The archaeological toolbox continues expanding. Even so, certainty remains surprisingly rare. One enduring mystery concerns the speed of change. For much of the 20th century, scholars often describe the emergence of villages and agriculture as a dramatic Neolithic revolution. The phrase suggests a rapid transformation sweeping across the ancient world within a relatively short period. Today, many archaeologists prefer a different picture. The evidence increasingly points toward countless local experiments unfolding across thousands of years. Some communities adopt farming gradually. Others continue hunting and gathering while neighboring villages cultivate crops. Certain innovations spread quickly. Others remain confined to particular regions for centuries. Human history appears less like a revolution than a mosaic. Every settlement follows its own path. Another unresolved question involves population. Exactly how many people live in the earliest villages? The answer matters enormously, because estimates influence every interpretation of social organization, food production, and community life. Yet determining ancient populations is notoriously difficult. Not every house is occupied simultaneously. Some buildings serve storage rather than residence. Others are abandoned while neighboring homes remain active. Families differ in size. Archaeologists must estimate using incomplete evidence. As a result, population figures often vary dramatically between researchers studying the same settlement. Çatalhöyük is one striking example. Some estimates suggest a few thousand inhabitants. Others propose significantly different numbers depending upon assumptions about housing density and occupation. The village continues resisting precise measurement. Agriculture presents equally persistent mysteries. Exactly where are wheat and barley first domesticated? Which communities begin cultivating them intentionally? How many independent centers of domestication exist across the ancient world? The archaeological record suggests several regions contribute important innovations, but the precise sequence remains actively debated. Plants evolve gradually. Human practices change gradually. The boundary between gathering and farming refuses to stay fixed. Animal domestication proves no less complicated. Sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle all follow different trajectories. Some species appear to enter close relationships with humans relatively quickly. Others require centuries of gradual management before becoming fully domesticated. Ancient DNA has transformed this field, revealing surprising episodes of mixing between wild and domestic populations long after domestication supposedly begins. History turns out to be far messier than simple timelines suggest. Even architecture raises unanswered questions. Why do some communities strongly prefer circular houses while others shift toward rectangular designs? Why are certain settlements densely packed, while others remain widely spaced? Why do building traditions sometimes remain stable for hundreds of years before changing rapidly? Climate alone cannot explain every difference. Neither can available building materials. Culture itself plays a powerful role. Communities inherit traditions just as surely as they inherit land. Religion remains perhaps the greatest mystery of all. The symbolic art decorating certain settlements clearly matters deeply to those who create it. Plastered skulls receive extraordinary care. Animal horns are incorporated into houses. Figurines appear repeatedly across wide regions. Yet interpretation remains difficult because modern observers inevitably view ancient objects through contemporary assumptions. A figurine does not arrive with written instructions. A painted wall cannot explain its own meaning. Responsible archaeology therefore proceeds carefully separating evidence from speculation. The temptation to invent dramatic explanations is always present. The discipline advances by resisting that temptation. Popular culture has often filled these gaps with imaginative theories. Lost supercivilizations, forgotten advanced technologies, mysterious vanished races possessing secret knowledge. While such ideas attract attention, mainstream archaeological evidence does not support them. The achievements of the first villagers require no hidden civilization to explain them. Ordinary human intelligence proves entirely sufficient. Given enough generations, practical knowledge accumulates into remarkable accomplishments. That conclusion may be less sensational. It is also far more extraordinary. Another fascinating mystery concerns language. The inhabitants of Jericho, Çatalhöyük, and hundreds of other settlements undoubtedly speak complex languages capable of expressing subtle ideas, preserving traditions, and coordinating sophisticated communal life. Not a single sentence survives. Writing has not yet emerged. The sounds of those conversations disappear forever. Children laugh. Builders exchange advice. Parents comfort infants. Neighbors negotiate marriages. Elders tell stories beside evening fires. Every word vanishes. Archaeology recovers their houses but never their voices. Perhaps this silence explains why the first villages continue capturing the imagination of both researchers and the public. They remain familiar enough to recognize, yet distant enough to resist complete understanding. The houses resemble homes. The hearths resemble kitchens. The tools fit comfortably into human hands. The footprints belong to people whose daily concerns, food, family, shelter, weather, children, neighbors, and memory remain surprisingly recognizable. Yet beyond those familiar details lies an immense gulf. We know what they build. We rarely know exactly why. We know how they farm. We cannot hear the songs accompanying the harvest. We know where they bury their dead. We do not know the names they whisper during the ceremony. Every discovery, therefore, carries two meanings. It answers one question. It creates another. This balance between knowledge and uncertainty defines modern archaeology. Its purpose is not to eliminate mystery, but to narrow it, carefully replacing speculation with evidence wherever possible, while acknowledging where the record remains incomplete. The first villages deserve that honesty. Their story is remarkable precisely because it belongs to real people, navigating uncertain worlds with intelligence, cooperation, creativity, and resilience. They do not possess supernatural knowledge. They possess something far more enduring, the ability to learn slowly across generations, leaving behind enough traces that thousands of years later, patient observers can still piece together fragments of their extraordinary journey. The first villages leave behind no founding document. No king records their construction. No priest describes the ceremonies that bless their first houses. No chronicler writes the names of the children who race across newly plastered floors, or the builders who smooth fresh mud against walls before another rainy season arrives. Yet almost every part of the modern human world can trace one of its deepest roots back to these quiet settlements. Their greatest achievement is not that they invent civilization, it is that they make civilization possible. Looking backward across 10,000 years, the distance seems almost unimaginable. Modern cities contain millions of people. Buildings climb hundreds of meters into the sky. Satellites orbit the Earth. Digital information crosses oceans in moments. Entire continents are connected through transportation networks beyond anything early villagers could conceive. And yet the essential framework begins with remarkably familiar decisions. People choose to remain together. They share labor. They protect food. They build homes meant to outlast a single season. They care for children. Remember ancestors, exchange knowledge, and prepare for futures extending beyond their own lifetimes. The first villages transform survival into continuity. That single change alters everything. Agriculture eventually produces reliable food surpluses capable of supporting populations far larger than wandering bands could sustain. Larger populations encourage specialization. Skilled builders refine architecture. Dedicated craftspeople improve tools. Traders connect distant regions. Knowledge accumulates because every generation inherits the discoveries of those who came before. Complexity grows almost naturally from permanence. Within a few thousand years, villages become towns. Towns become cities. Cities become states. Writing emerges to manage increasingly complicated economies. Mathematics develops alongside trade. Laws appear to regulate growing populations. Monumental architecture expresses political and religious authority. Every later civilization, whether in Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, the Indus Basin, northern China, Mesoamerica, or elsewhere, follows its own unique path. None follows exactly the same sequence, yet all depend upon foundations first explored by communities learning how to live together permanently. The village becomes humanity's original classroom. Its lessons continue long after the mud brick walls themselves disappear. Even today, many of the patterns shaping ordinary life remain surprisingly ancient. Neighborhoods still organize around shared spaces. Families continue passing practical knowledge from one generation to the next. Communities still cooperate to maintain roads, water systems, and public buildings. Food remains stored against uncertain futures. Homes continue serving as places where memory accumulates through repeated daily routines. The scale has changed beyond recognition. The principles remain remarkably familiar. Archaeology repeatedly demonstrates that technological progress alone never explains civilization. The earliest villagers possessed no metal tools during much of their history. No written language. No wheeled vehicles. No complex machinery. Their greatest innovations are social. Learning to trust neighbors, sharing labor, managing disagreement, planning beyond immediate survival, preserving knowledge, adapting together when conditions change. These invisible achievements prove every bit as important as farming or architecture. Indeed, they make those practical advances possible. Another enduring legacy lies in humanity's changing relationship with the landscape. Before permanent settlement, people adapt primarily to environments shaped by natural processes. Villages begin reversing that relationship. Fields are cultivated, forests are cleared, animals are selectively bred, water is redirected, plants evolve under human influence. The Anthropocene may be a modern scientific term, but its deepest origins stretch back toward these early communities, where human decisions first begin reshaping ecosystems in lasting ways. The process unfolds slowly. Its consequences continue today. The first villages also redefine time. Hunter-gatherers certainly think about the future often with extraordinary sophistication, but permanent settlements encourage planning across much longer horizons. A fruit tree planted today may benefit grandchildren. A carefully constructed house may shelter several generations. Fields improve through years of careful management. Ancestors become part of the landscape itself. The future acquires physical form. Perhaps this is why memory occupies such an important place within early villages. Burials beneath floors, repeated rebuilding upon ancient foundations, household traditions passed carefully between generations. The village teaches people to see themselves as participants in stories extending both backward and forward through time. Individual lives remain brief. Communities endure. That realization changes human history as profoundly as any technological invention. Modern archaeology continues revealing unexpected details almost every year. Ancient DNA uncovers forgotten migrations. Improved dating techniques refine timelines once thought settled. Microscopic analysis identifies foods invisible to earlier researchers. Remote sensing discovers buried settlements hidden beneath fields, deserts, and expanding modern cities. The story remains unfinished. Each excavation adds another fragment. Each fragment reminds us how much still waits beneath the soil. There is also something quietly humbling about the first villages. Their builders never intend to change world history. They are not seeking fame. They are not founding empires. Most never travel beyond neighbouring valleys. Their ambitions remain deeply practical. Repair the roof before winter. Protect the harvest. Raise healthy children. Remember the dead. Prepare for another season. History often celebrates conquerors. Archaeology reminds us that ordinary people shape the world more profoundly. The first villagers transform humanity not through spectacular victories but through patient repetition. One repaired wall, one stored harvest, one shared meal, one generation teaching the next. Their achievements survive because they are repeated countless times rather than performed once. When later civilizations eventually raise pyramids, temples, palaces, and massive city walls, they are building upon social foundations already tested for thousands of years in settlements whose names are mostly forgotten. The villages themselves rarely survive intact. Mud brick returns to earth, timber decays, roofs collapse, fields shift beneath changing climates, rivers alter their courses. Yet beneath modern farms, towns and cities, beneath highways and apartment buildings, beneath orchards and cultivated fields, fragments of those earliest homes still rest quietly within the ground. A polished stone axe, a broken grinding stone, the imprint of a child's footprint preserved in drying plaster, charred grains scattered across an ancient floor, a carefully buried ancestor sleeping beneath what was once a family home. These are not merely archaeological objects. They are reminders. Civilization does not begin with monuments. It begins when people decide that a place is worth returning to, worth repairing, worth sharing, and worth leaving better for those who come after. That simple decision, repeated across thousands of villages over countless generations, becomes one of the most influential choices humanity has ever made. The first villages are therefore not only the beginning of settled life, they are the quiet beginning of the world we still inhabit. The ruins of the first villages no longer resemble living communities. Their walls have softened into low earthen mounds. Their roofs have long since vanished beneath wind rain and centuries of drifting soil. Grass grows where hearths once warmed families through winter evenings. Birds settle on stones that generations of careful hands once carried into place. To a passer-by, these ancient landscapes may appear silent and empty. Yet beneath that silence rests one of humanity's greatest stories. Every layer of earth preserves the memory of ordinary lives. Someone shapes a mud brick before sunrise. Someone repairs a leaking roof after a storm. Someone grinds grain while children play nearby. Someone plants seeds with hope for a harvest still months away. None of these moments seems remarkable on its own. Together they become the foundation upon which all later civilization quietly stands. The people who build the first villages never know that their descendants will one day construct vast cities, cross oceans, explore space, or uncover their forgotten homes with careful archaeological tools. Their concerns remain close to the ground beneath their feet and the changing seasons above their heads. In many ways, that closeness becomes their greatest strength. They learn to watch rivers, soils, animals, weather, and one another with extraordinary patience. They discover that survival depends not only upon skill, but upon cooperation, memory, and the willingness to prepare for futures they themselves may never see. Thousands of years later, the villages remain gone, yet their ideas endure. Every neighborhood, every farming landscape, every community built upon shared effort carries a distant echo of those first experiments in permanence. Their names disappear, their voices fall silent, their homes slowly return to earth. But the quiet decision to stay, to build, to remember, and to begin again outlives every wall they ever raised. As the light fades across those ancient settlements once more, the wind moves gently over fields that have witnessed countless generations come and go. Beneath the soil, the first villages continue waiting with remarkable patience, reminding us that history is often shaped not by the loudest moments, but by the quiet persistence of ordinary people who choose day after day to create a place they can truly call home.